folks, and welcome to this week's show. We're back by popular request. We've got Rod and Jeremy. And as you can see behind my head, if I go the right way around, we're focusing on post-punk. And obviously, Jeremy's got some great post-punk singles behind him there, some top-notch songs. And what we're doing, we're focusing on the top 10 albums, which we've discussed in depth, I think is the phrase, between 1977 and 1982. So we're going over 5 years. So that sort of removes certain albums that might have fitted in with 83. So I know people will kick up, oh, you could have put this and that and the other in. Absolutely, we totally agree. But we just thought we'd keep it fairly narrow because the list was just never ending. So Rod, we're going to go through the criteria here. And we'll start with Rod, then Jeremy, then myself. We'll discuss some of the criteria that we've done for this, because this has been never ending. We've sent WhatsApp messages back and forth trying to say, yes, that's acceptable. No, that's a certain genre. No, you can't have them. Yes, you can have them. It's been crackers. Rod, what did you take away from it? What have you got?
Well, I suppose being of an age, I lived through it, seeing the Clash and the Ruts and things. And so there are certain bands that I suppose I'd associate with punk, which I ruled out, I guess, because of my memories of that time. And then there's other ones who were possibly around about, like you say, the same time, 77, 78, 79. The Clash kind of first two albums were punk, second two were arguably post-punk. So I ruled them out because they kind of were both. But it's such a broad church, like you say, and because it's carried on into Interpol, Idols, if you want to talk about current bands, that have all been influenced. You could go on from 77 to 2024. So we picked this window, which I think was probably what I would say the peak post-punk, really. And then the ones, I suppose, the early post-punk bands that then influenced the bands that I've just mentioned and the ones since the most, I guess. So that combined with the ones I listened to the most and the ones that have stayed dear to my heart the most over that massive period of time. They're the ones that have made my 10, really. And I've left out absolutely tons, but here's only 10.
The honourable mentions list at the end is going to be nuts. There's some, honestly, all the albums are 5 stars, so I'm not going to bother with the rankings. They're all killers. And there's some crazy albums that we've missed out here, honestly, folks. It's I don't know what the other two gentlemen have got here, but I know for a fact I've missed loads. And if I've missed loads, they'll have missed loads. So we shall see. Jeremy, go through what you thought in terms of the criteria.
Well, I remember early on we started talking, and since post-punk and new wave sort of were happening simultaneously, I think there is a genre division in those things. New wave lasted longer into the 80s than post-punk did, I think, in its original iteration. So I started thinking about it in terms of lineage. What is the artist's lineage to get to that point? And the way I sort of divided in my head was, if your lineage was Roxy, Eno, Kraftwerk, Can, you were probably post-punk. If your lineage is Beatles, ska, soul, and R&B, you're probably new wave. So even if you think about someone like Elvis Costello, he drew on all those things. Dionne Warwick and Burt Bacharach were big influences on him. Country music was a big influence. That doesn't fit in with the post-punk genre to me. Blondie, they were more punk, but then they became new wave. So that's the way I looked at it myself. And it's a very important era for me because 78 is really when I started buying a ton of contemporary records. I was 14, I turned 14 in 78 and really started getting into what was being released then. The original punk movement was a little before my time in the sense of I was too young to go to CBGBs to see Talking Heads or Blondie or Television or any of those early punk bands. I didn't see the Ramones until the end of the Century tour, so that was a little later in their career. So to me, this was a music that felt very much like my music. And since I am like an eclectic listener, that's one of the things that I think really gravitated me to it, is because punk rapidly became very narrow.
Yes.
3 chords and shouted vocals. Whereas I love the post-punk sound where it could almost be anything. And to me, it felt like a Cambrian explosion, all these different species of music that we could sort of fit into one thing. And this could be an honorable mention, but I'll just mention this amazing compilation, Wanna Buy a Bridge, which Rough Trade put out, I think in 81.
All right, okay.
a huge influence. It's got Delta 5, the Slits, TV personality, Swell Maps. The Raincoats are on here, Young Marble Giants, Gritty Politti, Robert Wyatt. So it's just, it was a really great slice and led me in all these different directions. So and that was when I started defining, even back then, I don't remember if we called it post-punk, but it felt like
No,
something was happening. It was a movement that was connected to punk, but it was kind of, if punk was year zero, this is rebuilding on top of that.
yeah, I think that's fair enough. I mean, there are certain, for me, it's again, it's probably along similar lines between both of you. There are bands, as you rightly say, Rod, you put bands who started off as punk bands, but also ventured out, like the Ruts, for example. They were. I was more into the second wave of punk by the time I was buying records. So like the Ruts, the Undertones, Stiff Little Fingers, all of those sort of great bands. Slightly later, Dead Kennedys. So yeah, I've removed all of that. Bands that I love, artists I love like Elvis Costello. We've removed like the bands who came from the pub scene, like Ian Dury and the Blockheads, who I absolutely adore. Their first album would have easily made it for me if it had been that sort of genre. So I've removed them, removed the ska bands because that's almost a separate sort of entity. You know, you've got your Specials, Madness, anybody who've appeared on the Two Tone label. So even on Two Tone Tour, like the Beat, and also bands who I love like Dexys, I've removed them as well because of the fact that, again, I see them almost as a separate sort of style. How do you define Dexys? God knows. But so it's very, very difficult, very, very, very difficult to try and sort of work out what you can and can't. And I really struggled. So we were saying like, oh, if you're influenced by that, as you say, the likes of like Kraftwerk and Bowie and all those sort of great artists, then as I've got the lineage thing, removed the pub rock bands. So I removed the Stranglers, and I would easily argue that Black and White fits in with the sort of post-punk because it's slightly different than the first two, but I've gone with it. There's a couple of albums that I'm unsure of, and I've cheated at number one, so I didn't care. I've gone with it. So we've got a real mix here. And feel free to shout us down and send in your lists. We'd love it. Check out our other shows as well, folks. Just a quick reminder: give us a like, thumbs up, and sort of subscribe. We've got new shows on bands like the Ramones, Killing Joke, XTC, as well as other sort of genres. You know, you've got Genesis and Kate Bush and so on and so forth. So check those shows out, Radiohead and so on and so forth. So check them all out. You know, it'd be fab. So please subscribe. Anyway, we're going to go in order. So we're going to start with Rod in at number 10, then Jeremy, then myself. So, Rod, what have you got in at number 10?
Number 10 is 1980 album called In the Flat Field by Bauhaus. It's number 10. They're actually local band to me. They're from Northampton, which is only 20 miles up the road. So I've seen them live quite a lot of times before they released albums, actually. And they grew a massive following and became quite seminal, really. A pretty seminal band. And ironically, later on, when I worked at a printing company, their road manager worked with me, funnily enough. So I used to chat about them with him, about gigs and stuff. And that album is it's very gothic, very dark, but it's got a punky edge to it. It's got just a style. It's got a very post-punk style. It is gothic, but there's angular guitars, songs like Stigmata Martyr, Dark Entries. It's just, for me, it just feels like a pretty special album of that time. They didn't make it big, but I think that lots of people would reference them. Quite a lot of bigger bands who made it bigger than they did would say.
I think in the last couple of years they've really come into vogue. Funnily enough, it's one of those things that maybe took 40 years, but they're sort of in vogue. Go on, Rod. Sorry, I do apologise.
No, it's all right. And they're similar to the Cure and Siouxsie and The Banshees and that kind of sound, I think. And they were early proponents of that, and they just didn't quite hit the zeitgeist and make it big. Although Pete Murphy went solo and made some albums as well. I think they made some other albums, Mask, and I forgot the name of the other one. But their first album stands out to me as quite a unique sound. It was new, it was fresh, and And it was like Jeremy just said, it was in that, wheelhouse of like anything goes, and they decided to do something, that they wanted to do, and they created their own sound. And it's Bela Lugosi's Dead is a classic track now. That's not on that album because it's a 12-inch single and whatever, but it was parallel release in that sort of timeline. And like I said, it's a classic that would be standalone with any other classic post-punk.
Absolutely love it. It's one of those songs I put on in the house and they'll come on the mix in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And
it still sounds.
And it sounds brilliant. The kids go, Bela Lugosi's Dead. And the kids will go, what the hell's that, Dad?
It just sounds weirdly fantastic, like even now.
Yeah,
Definitely. So yeah, that's why it made my top 10, to be honest.
Brilliant. I love just on my bubbling under that. Sorry, Jeremy.
I was just saying I love Bauhaus myself. They didn't actually make my list. They're one of those also rans. Partly because it really developed into that goth thing. And spoiler alert, same with Siouxsie and the Banshees. Arguably their first album could be seen as very post-punk. Their second could be even be new wave. But then they really became this avatar of goth. So I left them off. But I do love Bauhaus. I have about 4 of their albums. Really great stuff. But my number...
Yeah, great. Go on, Jeremy.
For my number 10. Before I give my number 10, I'm just going to mention a few stats. Of the 10 albums I picked, 6 of them are debut albums. That gives an idea of the explosion that was happening.
Okay.
3 are sophomore albums, and 1 is a third album. 2 of the debuts are also only albums, bands that only released 1 album. And then, lastly, 8 of them are UK releases, 2 are US releases. The UK was incredibly strong in this era. I thought about there was one really big one that almost made it in from the US, but it got pushed out by this album, which is called 1965 to 1980. It's by a band called Basement 5, really fascinating group. They came out on Island in 1980. It includes Leo Ezekiel Williams, who was in Big Audio Dynamite later on. Richard Dudansky was the credited drummer, but another guy was the actual drummer. Dennis Morris, who designed the Public Image Limited logo and also this logo, was the singer. He was also a photographer, filmmaker, did a lot of great things. Just an absolute killer band. The guitarist's name was JR. Fantastic guitarist. Now here's the killer. This was recorded and produced by Martin Hannett, who, if you're a Joy Division fan, would be a very familiar name to you. He said it was the heaviest album, the most difficult production he ever made. The sound is absolutely extraordinary. This kind of rubbery bass, straight out of dub reggae, and these scratchy, angular guitars. And then you have Dennis Morris, who I don't think he was a singer before he sang on this record. He's got this very harsh voice, even harsher than Killing Joke. And I'll give you the honest truth. I bought this when it came out because there was big hype behind it. Island Records, these other heavy people that we had been hearing about. I put it on and I thought it was absolute crap. I was with 2 friends. We listened to it the first time. We were like, what is this? Like some sounds were good on it, but other sounds just sounded terrible, including the vocals. So I just shelved it. And about every 5 years, I would pull it out. Literally 25 years after I bought it was one of those times I pulled it out, I put it on, and I was like, oh my God, this is just a fantastic record. It's so good. And then when I played it like through this process, I was listening to things that, were either here or there on the list. I was just dancing around the living room, playing air drums, singing along with it. It's just got these anthemic choruses, The Last White Christmas, Immigration, Riot is the first song, No Ball Games. It's just kind of it's a tough, hard album with beautiful elements of reggae, loud guitars, and some incredible solos, where it just wails. I can't say enough about this record. As far as I know, it's still not on streaming except for maybe Last White Christmas, which was the big single off of it. But you can get it on CD, and it's been reissued on LP too. I treasure it. That's my number 10, Basement 5, 1965 to 1980.
Well, I've never heard of it, so I'm going to have to check it out. I love stuff like this when you've never heard anything. You go, oh, I've definitely got to go and check that out. Well, my number 10 was released in 1970. I'm looking at my notes here on the side there. I'll do them on the screen instead. And I've gone with the Replicas album by Tubeway Army, which I think is a truly great album. I've just went to see him the other week doing the whole album live. It's just brilliant, you know. So it's a loose concept album. Obviously, Gary Newman is the sort of main man. It's a concept album based on a dystopian book, sort of, you know, in the sort of J.J. Ballard or Philip K. sort of Dick sort of style, set in the non too distant future. It's a reference of androids and clones and all the rest of it. It's just brilliant. It's got a real sort of Bowie-eggy sort of feel to it. I love the sort of, actually, I genuinely love the guitars on this. I know it's quite controversial because we all assume Gary Newman's a keyboard guy, but apparently he was mainly a guitarist, really, and stumbled by the keyboards by mistake in the studio. It's just a terrific album. It's really sort of dystopian. It's got a Blade Runner sort of sound to it. To me, it's almost like a soundtrack for that sort of film. There's so many great songs on it. I love the brilliance of May I Disconnect From You with that sort of weird keyboard at the beginning and sort of isolation, and then the bass and the distorted guitars going dun, 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 dun. It's just magnificent. Our Friends Electric, one of the greatest songs ever written about sort of having sex with robots, like you do. It's just sublime. And again, it's one of those songs. We played it on the keyboards, and apparently he messed up on the last note, and therefore the last note was actually. They said, "Oh, that works out really well." Allegedly, I'm just going back to the story I heard him talk about, and that's how he came up with the riff. It was he slightly got wrong on the keys, and it's now the big famous riff. Goes on forever as well. Our Friends Electric. It's really a long song. #1 in the UK. Just amazing. Of course, we had the famous Bowie story as well, where he was on the Kenny Everett show and Bowie wouldn't let him be in the same room, basically put them out. And then he was obviously upset, understandably so. But apparently years later, I think Bowie really regretted it and actually came out and said, listen, he's wrote some really great songs. So that's pretty cool in hindsight, you know, the fact that he's appreciated he made a mistake. And some super songs. Praying to the Aliens is fantastic. Down in the Park's one of the great post-punk singles. I Nearly Married a Human, great. It's just a proper groundbreaking album. So fabulous. Can't speak highly enough about it. And that's my #10. So there we go. Tubeway Army, Replicas. Rod, where have you got at #9?
Now, Jeremy's just mentioned Killing Joke. I've got, well, funny enough, I was just checking my list there, and 5 of my 10 are debut albums as well. So, you know, similar in that sense. Just shows you how good, you know, people were, how new stuff was coming out all over the shop. Yeah, Killing Joke's debut album. Again, it was 1980, same year as Bauhaus, actually. They sound, I was listening to it the other day, and I should realise, I didn't realise how much they sounded like Siouxsie and The Banshees. Some of the tracks, the guitar work is really quite similar on the more up-tempo songs. Not so much Tomorrow's World and that, but things like War Dance and what's the other one? I've forgotten what they're called now. But Jazz Coleman, they're very much post-punk to me. Like they were just after punk. Yeah. Like you say, not the best singer, but he's got it fits the music, which is important, you know, isn't it? You know, if there's lots of vocalists, if they fit the band and fit the music, and he does, he's got this sort of kind of.
Remember, he was choir trained though, so he was doing a lot of that. Partly, well, he was choir trained, but I also read that he did not like his voice, so
which is quite
that
common.
led him to apply a lot of distortion to it, especially on that first album. It was sort of a lack of confidence. He felt he had to mess it up.
So yeah, I wasn't really aware that Jazz Coleman wasn't keen on his own voice, which Jeremy had mentioned. So that's something I wasn't aware of, but it is understandable. But it fits the music perfectly well, and I think that Killing Joke are very much a post-punk band to me. I was into punk bands; they came pretty much just after. And I remember War Dance was a big single, which we used to dance to, and it's something that was it's close to my heart, really, that particular song and a couple of others on that album, Tomorrow's World, Think, and Requiem. There's a few others that have stayed with me, really, and they had to have an album in it, and I went for their debut album because, again, it was their own sound, and it was in with it fitted in that envelope, much like Bauhaus, really. Not the same as Bauhaus, but at the same time, that massive melting pot of anything goes, and they did their own thing, and it was great, and it had a visceral nature to it as well, which always draws me in anyway. So that's why I went for their debut album. They've got other good albums as well, don't get me wrong. But yeah, the Killing Joke's debut album, same year, so two 1980 albums at 10 and 9 for me to start with.
Great choice. Go and check out our show on Killing Joke, which the lads talked about, which was fascinating, actually.
They have a lot of good albums.
Doing quite well on numbers, actually. Great show. Right then, Jeremy, what have you got at number 9?
Number 9, I have the debut album from the Raincoats. One of the best parts of punk and post-punk was the inclusion of more women's voices, women's playing. It was so common to have a woman singer, but it wasn't as common to have women in the band as it became in the post-punk era. Obviously, you had Tina Weymouth and the Talking Heads and a few others here and there, but then it really kicked in, I think, with the post-punk era, and they were an all-female band. I just love the ramshackle quality of it, where they're aiming more for a feeling than for any kind of competence, and the feeling is so clear. The key song on here, I think, was the single In Love, which it's got this woozy stop-start feeling that actually makes you feel that feeling of when you're falling in love with somebody. And that's not a very easy thing to capture. It's one thing to talk about it, but this really makes you feel that way. And it's got that sense of confusion, what's happening to me, and it speeds up, it slows down. It's just a fabulous song. Of course, they picked up a little notoriety for covering Lola and not changing the pronouns. That was a big deal back in 1979. But such a great album. I listened to this over and over again. The Void has just this slow start, and then it just gets crazy. One of the distinctive sounds on this was the violin, which you don't hear on too many bands. So there was a bit of art rock to it, but it was another thing I liked about it is that it did not rely on power. So many punk bands and even post-punk bands relied on power. This was more of a sketchy, spindly, slap together, we're going to make this work no matter what, even though we don't think we can play our instruments, we're not 100% confident, we're not 100% there. Turned out years and years later, we learned it was one of Kurt Cobain's favorite albums. He actually was instrumental in getting their records put back into print. They had gone out of print. The second album, Oddie Shape, is also wonderful, different. It's a little more polished. It's a little more in that art rock realm, but also equally beautiful. I didn't really like anything of theirs after that, but this is just an essential album from that time. I think the cover kind of just gives you the feel childlike, not childish, playful, not virtuosic. I just love it. It's one of those albums where the first time you hear it, it might sound a bit like noise, or it does not come together. But the more you get into it, it just becomes like an old friend. And so it has been for me since then.
Right. Very good, very good. The first girl thing I ever remember in terms of the punk thing was the Slits, funnily enough, because bizarrely, this is a true story. My dad used to buy singles and stuff ever since I was a little kid, from about the age of 3 and 4. And he once brought home Typical Girls, just gave us it. And the B-side, if I remember right, was Heard It Through the Grapevine.
Heard It Through the Grapevine, absolutely fantastic. I have the 12-inch.
And so I remember hearing it, and I didn't know what to make of it. I genuinely didn't know what to make of it, because at the time I was into like the Undertones and Sham 69 and all that sort of stuff. So the Slits were quite out there, and they were quite on a different sort of style at the time. But yeah, I did grow to really love it, actually.
I do love the Slits, and the interesting thing is that the Slits also do one of the songs from here.
All right, okay.
On the Cut album, I think it's Adventures Close to Home. Really, really, that's a really great album. We'll talk about that a little later, but we love the Raincoats.
Well, a member of the Slits will feature later for me, but that's another story. In at number 9, I've got Adam and the Ants, and I've gone with Dirt Wears White Socks, which I think is a truly great album. I know people go with Kings of the Wild Frontier, and it is fantastic. Let me just put that out there. But I've gone with Dirt Wears White Socks because I think it fits the style more. I think it fits the genre of post-punk a little bit more. And it's one of the first albums that I heard that's got that real angular guitar. So as musicians, this is the first lineup of the Ants as well, which is very, very different to the sort of Marco Peroni Ants, which came later. You know, this is the sort of Dave Barb version of the Ants. And Matthew, I forgot your surname now on guitar, on was it bass? I can't remember now. But
Yeah, I think that
yeah,
band abandoned him at one point.
yes,
And
that's right. Well, the band left and formed Bow Wow Wow. But that's a lot of it's down to McLaren, and it's one of those up in the air stories, I think. But I did see them reform and perform this about 2013 at the Hammersmith Apollo, and it was a brilliant gig. It was really, really tremendous. So they did the whole of this album with the proper lineup, or what's left of. It's just a great album. It's really humorous. The musicianship's brilliant. I love Dave Barb. He's just fantastic. It's a really great, as I say, album. And apparently, and I was just checking up on this and some research there. It's apparently they were saying that they tried to make almost a funk Donna Summers type album, which makes no sense at all. But then it says check out Dave Barb's drumming. But it's a great album. I mean, Car Trouble kicks off. It's really the long version. It's controversial lyrics, I'll be honest. It's parts, but superb. We've got other songs that are just great. The Dear Met God is really funny. You know, the chorus, the Dear Met God, it was pissing down with rain is just great. The song about JFK is excellent. Cleopatra is one of my favorites. It's really sexually provocative. And again, the thing about the Ants as well, they were very sexual based in a sort of hardcore manner as well. It wasn't just sort of straightforward stuff. It was quite, they went into bondage and all sorts in terms of the lyrics. So you had all of that going on, which was very different when you were a young lad and stuff like that. You go, what's that mean? So Cleopatra, she was a wide-mouthed girl. At the time, I didn't quite know what that meant. Animals and Men's great. It's about references to the futurists. So they've got that art stats thing going on as well. So they do have the art thing, the lineage back, as you were saying as well. Never Trust a Man with Egg on His Face is great. At the time, slaughtered by the press when this came out. They were not the press darlings, and they wrote the big famous song, Press Darlings. People like Paul Morley would slaughter them, but what does he know? It's a terrific album, and it's one of those albums that people listen back now and you can hear bands like Franz Ferdinand, who came much years later. You can hear that guitar sound, and it stems back to bands like these and XTC and all of those sort of bands that were around at the time with that angular sort of style guitar that was not fitting in with the punk sort of sound. It was very, very different. Great album, just top album. I love Do It Wears White Socks. And I had the original on the Do It label as well when it came out, you know, so it's one of those. I was always proud of that. So there we go. That's my number 9. Rod, what have you got at number 8?
Number 8, I've got, let me just check. I'm pretty sure it's, hang on a sec. Yeah, I've got, I did flip a couple around late on. We mentioned Siouxsie and The Banshees earlier, and she was kind of punk, but she's also quintessentially post-punk, really, because even though she came out earlier, she never really was punk, to be fair. She was too arty, really, too musical, too melodic, just too polished, really. I mean, the musicians, you know, Budgie and Steve Severin and stuff, you know, they were hardly Sid Vicious, were they? Do you know what I mean? So I think that they were proper musicians, and you know, the connection with Robert Smith, you know, who famously played with them on a tour or two, I think, and he used to just stand at the back on rhythm guitar because he was so shy, and he got he says his sort of confidence as being a frontman came from watching her being overtly confident. And that's the other thing about Siouxsie and The Banshees. I mean, you talk about women, and there wasn't a lot of women. You know, Debbie Harry, Tina Weymouth, you know, the Raincoats, but there wasn't many. They started to come into it more with Claire Grogan, and but Siouxsie was just a different level almost. You know, she was, you know, more confident than any bloke, any man was as a front person, and that's kind of unheard of, really, a little bit. You know, to be that front and center and that in your face and that confidence, pretty unusual for a woman in a rock band.
before then, you had literally, in terms of rock bands, you had Susie Quattro, who I loved, by the way,
Yeah.
and then later on, you've got, as you say, Debbie Harry, who's magnificent. Let's be
Yeah.
honest, but there weren't many. There weren't
But
many. I
there
mean,
was
from
But
Jane-
prior to that, prior to that, you had singer-songwriters like, Carole King.
yeah, and Joni Mitchell and that. Yeah,
But that's a different thing, to
yeah,
front a rock band that makes a loud noise, and to be that just overtly confident
yeah,
is a special thing, really, and it's kind of unique. And I think she had to be in the top 10 somewhere. And then you sort of think, well, what album should I pick? So really, going back to my criteria at the start, I picked the one that I've played the most over time. And if someone said to me, what's your favorite Siouxsie album, it'd have to be Juju, which is in our time window. It's 1981, I think.
yeah.
And you could argue it's more polished, obviously, than the Scream and Join Hands, and Kaleidoscope was the third one, I think. But she gradually got more polished. But it's still post-punky. There's the guitars, the guitar sound. John McGeoch,
Brilliant.
who's a post-punk legend in
Absolutely.
the sense that
Fantastic.
someone who's played in Magazine, Public Image, and Siouxsie and the Banshees successfully. That's a pretty special post-punk guitarist, and obviously he's still there playing those songs, and you've got commercial hits like Arabian Nights and Spellbound, as well as
Fireworks and stuff is brilliant.
yeah, and also luckily, like, I was quite happy Kate Bush got that sort of fillet from Stranger Things, didn't she, with Running Up That Hill, where a whole load of youngsters went, oh, who's she? Well, Spellbound was used in that as well. And again, people probably listened to that and thought, what the hell is that? But like I'm talking about, 12, 13, 14,
It's
15.
magnificent. That's what it is.
And it's great that, there's people downloading Spellbound, who are 15 to 25, fantastic, because they ain't going to get anything like that now, trust me.
No.
And yeah, so it's my favorite, marginally my favorite Siouxsie album. So I had to have a Siouxsie album in there, and Juju, Monitor, I didn't mention Monitor. Favorite Siouxsie track, probably bar none. That's a post-punk track. Nailed on. I mean, the riff is just archetypal post-punk. Absolutely fantastic song, Monitor. I could listen to it anytime, any day. So yeah, that had to be in 10s. It could have been slightly higher maybe, but it's 8. That's where it landed.
Yeah, magic. Might get a mention soon.
Absolutely love Siouxsie and the Banshees. Like I said, for me, it felt a little on the goth side, so it
fair
made
enough.
it for me not to put them on this list because it was just so hard. Now, my number 8 is 154 by Wire.
Yeah.
That's their third album, and it's really the first one that I got into. Obviously, I knew about their first album. There was almost one of those Trojan horse bands where people thought they were punk because the songs were very short on their first album, and they were very harsh, often using those textures, but they always had that art influence going on, that angularness. There was never any reference to 50s rock and roll like you'd get with the Sex Pistols or the Clash and a lot of the other early, even the Ramones, 50s, 60s. There was something very European sounding about Wire. And this album just grabbed me hook, line, and sinker. I first heard the song Map Reference 41 degrees north, 93 degrees west. Give it its full title, Map Ref. It's melodic, it's intriguing, it's unusual sounding. The way they blend the synths and the guitars together was very original. Mike Thorne, who produced this album, got a lot of credit for giving them that little edge of polish. But as we've seen from Wire's subsequent career, they are still an existent band, have released some marvelous records in the 21st century. They knew what they were doing all along. And this was also the third album, like I said, and the last one before they went out in a blaze of glory and took a hiatus for, I think, until 1986 or so. They were doing other things, and they put out that crazy album of collages, and I'm trying to remember the name of it right now, but yeah, their next album was not till 1987. they they foundered on the shoals of making their fourth album, and so in a way this is the pinnacle, I think, of their first career, the first 3 albums. It's got some very, very arty stuff on there. The 15th, it's very slow and repetitive. They're drawing on minimalism from classical music, I believe. I also love the song on Returning, A Touching Display. I Should Have Known Better, the song that starts the album. It's just startling. I should have known better. It just grabs you. Definitely a Bowie influence, definitely, like I said, a krautrock, European influence. Absolutely just a beautiful masterpiece of an album. I feel lucky that I got to see them live about 10 years ago. I don't recall if they did, I think they did mostly new stuff. Just one of my favorite bands of all time. And I think an astonishing career when you look back. Like Killing Joke, they are still going. So that's my number 8.
Well, that
Oh,
was
and I
one of
love
my albums that just missed, and it was that one.
154 because they played
154.
154 concerts before it
Oh,
was
was that
released.
right? All right. I never knew why they called it that. That's fair enough.
Just seems
They're
obvious.
nerds, very nerdy. I love it.
Seems obvious now.
Well, from now on in, from 8 on in, I literally could have chucked any of these in order and they could have been number 1, any of them. And I've probably gone down the route of which ones have I played the most. So my number 8, I'm looking at my notes here, is it's basically Dare by the Human League. Some people might class it as pop, actually, but I see it as post-punk because in terms of where they came from, the fact that they've got a member of the Rezillos on keyboards, I think sort of lends itself a little bit. So they're a band who were really arty and out there and had no real, very minor success. I mean, Beer Boyle's brilliant, may I add. But they didn't have,
An Empire State Human.
yeah, but they didn't have any success, did they? They had a song called Tom Baker as well, which I love. But they didn't have any real hits. The band split up. One of them became Heaven 17, who were a really great pop band, actually. And then we had this version of the Human League. And I just think it's one of those albums I play it to death. It's just a great, great album. It's just beautiful, I mean, it's in itself, it's quite punk rock, isn't it? To sort of leave half the band leave. You get a member of the Rezillos in, and then you get 2 teenage girls that you see dancing in a nightclub and get them up as singers. How mad is that? And it works. It works beautifully. It's a dark album. It's really poppy as well. Some of the great lyrics. I mean, there can't be many better lyrics than Norman Wisdom, Johnny, Joey, Dee Dee, Good Times. I think that's just magnificent. I really do love it. They've got some great pop songs on, as we know, Open Your Heart, Sound of the Crowd, fantastic. I love their adaptation of Get Carter. I think it's superb. It's really dark. It sort of fits in with that sort of ambience, but it's really futuristic as well compared to the Roy Budd original. Just marvelous. Love Action, just a great pop song. And then, of course, Don't You Want Me, which has actually got sort of quite dark lyrics. Yep, one of the biggest hit singles of all time. My kids love it. And it is such a great pop song. It was number 1 in the UK in 1981 at Christmas, famously. And of course, infamously, he didn't want it on the album. Hence the fact it's the last track on the album. He genuinely thought it wasn't going to be a hit. And of course, it's their sort of signature tune now, isn't it? With Phil Oakey. So great song, Dare. Almost got a concept feel in some respects to it. It's got that sort of real sort of sound to it about it, but I just love it. It's just brilliant, man. Absolutely brilliant. So that's my number 8. And as I say, any of these could be number 1. So I've just thrown it in at number 8. Rod, what have you got in at 7?
7. We mentioned John McGeoch earlier. And I've got another debut album. I've got Real Life by Magazine at 7. It's one of those albums that I've played it to death over the years. I bought it when it came out, right from the opening riff of Definitive Gaze, which is quite distinctive. It's just got a great, interesting sound from the get-go. Obviously, shot by both sides. If that was released last week, it'd sound fresh to me. It's just a fantastic song. The riff, the song construction, the chorus. It's just a fantastic indie post-punk song shot by both sides.
Although as a song, of course, it was originally written with Pete Shelley, and the Buzzcocks did their version, which is, I think it's Lipstick, isn't it? And
Yeah,
it's got the same chorus
yeah.
with different lyrics, which is really very clever to have two great songs with the same sort of chord structure. Is just great.
But
Love it.
the sound of Magazine is very post-punk. You
Yeah,
know,
very different.
largely because of his not exclusively, but largely because of his guitar style. I suppose the riffs sound less punky,
Yeah,
and more post-punky, stroke new wavy. You know, things like Motorcade and The Light Pours Out of Me. You
yeah,
know, fantastic songs. And you could tell it was Howard Devoto because he was in the Buzzcocks originally, wasn't he?
yeah.
He sang Spiral Scratch EP and whatnot, and he had this sort of lazy kind of semi-camp kind of strange voice. But again, a bit like Jazz Coleman earlier, it fits the
Fits
music
perfectly.
fantastically, yeah. And I still play that album now. So
Mm.
again, it couldn't. It's close to my heart because I played it a lot back in the day. I've still got my original copy. I still play it now, and it couldn't not be in the top 10. And Magazine again have made other good albums, you
Yes, they
know,
have. Yeah,
without doubt they have. But I still think that probably because it's close to me and I know the songs better, but it would still be their best album, I think.
yeah. I agree with you. Actually, I agree
But
with you. Yeah,
just overall and on balance, it probably still is their best album, even though it's their debut album, and it is a very strong debut album, I think. And like I say, "Shot by Both Sides" is one of my favourite songs of that ilk or style or genre, or whatever. Probably in my top 10 songs of that style. Probably, I think. Yeah, great album. Yeah, fantastic.
yeah.
That's
Can it
one I need to
argue?
revisit.
Can it argue with you? Uh, Jeremy, what have you got at number
I don't
seven?
think yeah, Magazine, I got to revisit them. I don't think I've listened
Oh,
to them
great man.
since back in the day. So my number 7 is one of my American entries, which is the Feelies' debut, Crazy Rhythms. Just an album that took me totally by surprise. And there's an interesting quote where they were definitely going against punk. They said in an interview, the sound we were after was a reaction against the punk scene. Being a little older, we felt it had all been done before. We wanted the guitars to be cleaner, and we started experimenting with a lot of percussion. And there's so much percussion on this album. The two main guys in the Feelies are Glenn Mercer and Bill Million. Each of them plays temple block, shaker, cloves, maracas, bells, castanets, sticks, shoes, drums, coat rack, tom snare, cowbell. I mean, it's such a busy, hyper sound to it. A lot of people may not know that they covered Everybody's Got Something to Hide, except for Me and My Monkey. I think it's one of the best Beatles covers of all time. It's super fast. It just burns through the song and so much fun. That's one of the things about this album that's different than a lot of post-punk albums, is that there's a lot of fun on this album. Face La, which was their first single, you see it behind me there with the Rough Trade logo on it. It's just a catchy, poppy song, but it's done in this very spidery, amped up way with, like I said, all the percussion. And then they have the song, The Boy with the Perpetual Nervousness, which is just very cerebral and starts out so quiet. You think the record's not beginning. And then it just builds up into this very loud layers of guitars. They really were just brilliant at how many guitars they would layer over all that percussion. Loveless Love is great. Forces at Work is a fantastic song. I just love this album. Moscow Nights. And I actually got to see them back then. They were marvelous, absolutely incredible performers. But the weird thing about the Feelies, I mean, they're still around today. They just put out a Velvet Underground covers album a couple of years ago that I didn't like much. But they took till 1986 to put out a second album. And by then things had changed a lot. I don't know exactly what was going on between them, but I do like that album a lot, The Good Earth. But they became more of a still minimalist. They used a lot of repetition, but they came almost a minimalist Americana band. There's a lot of like country and folk influences on The Good Earth and the one that followed it. I like those albums a lot, but this is one of those albums where it's sort of a one-off. They never made an album that really sounded like this again. So it holds a very special place in my heart. Crazy Rhythms by the Feelies.
I listened to that. I listened to that album earlier today.
A lot of people point out that Weezer seems to have been influenced by this cover.
Well, I'm gonna have to check it out because I'd never heard of it. I've
Yeah,
heard of them, but never heard it.
Yeah, I listened to it just because it was referenced. So I thought I was listening to ones I wasn't so familiar with. I listened to it earlier on. Yeah, quite
Good
it's an interesting sound. Yeah, for sure.
Check that out. Okay. Well, my number 7, and I'm pleased Rod picked Juju because go and watch my Siouxsie and The Banshees show. It's very, very high up, is the phrase I'm going to use. But I've gone slightly differently, and I thought, no, I'm going to flip it, and I've gone with A Kiss in the Dream House again, which is literally the following year. It's just absolutely brilliant. It's along the same lines as Juju, but with a bit more production value, I would suggest. It's got a bit more strings on it and a little bit more of a sort of stylistic sound on it. Again, very dark. It's just a brilliant album with the classic line of, McGeoch on guitar and that, and Budgie and Severin. It's just superb. The lyrics, I love the lyrics as well. Susie's a really great songwriter in terms of the lyrics. Cascade and Seven writes a lot as well. Cascade's brilliant about sexual fantasy. I love the sort of thrill, and the bass line's fantastic, and the sort of, it's almost sort of climactic at times as well, with a sort of bass which fits in with the lyrics. Superb. Some great songs on this. Obsession's brilliant. She's a Carnival, absolutely top-notch song. Melt is just exceptional. Could have been written by John Barry. It's got that sort of sound. It's brilliant. What else have I got here? Some great songs. This name, Painted Birds, great. Cocoons, fantastic. Slow Dive, a song about sex, and I've written here aptly. It's very rhythmic. It's a truly great album. There's even songs that were released like Fireworks that didn't make the album that was supposed to be on but didn't end up on it, which is just great. Sort of, they're a great band, and if you've not really listened to them, go and check out Juju, go and check out Kiss in the Dream House. They're amazing albums. The first one's a great album, is very much that almost introduction of post-punk, that sort of unusual guitar sound. But McGeoch is such an exceptional musician. He takes it up another level. And can I just add, Budgie is an amazing drummer. Was in the Slits for a while. So there's my Slits reference, but he's an incredible drummer. He uses the toms in such an unusual and stylistic manner. What never gets mentioned when you talk about the great drummers, and he's right up there for me because he's so unique, so different for this skinny little bloke, and he's got this big drum sound. I found out he's called Budgie the other day because he makes a clicking noise with his tongue when he speaks. So they said it's Budgie. I never knew that. And that's really quite cruel.
I never wondered why he was called that for some
That's
reason.
really cruel if that's true. I hope it's not.
It is quite cruel, yeah.
Yeah,
that's
but
really weird. Yeah.
What a drummer.
I also love the Creatures.
Yeah.
Was Siouxsie and Budgie's side project.
Yes, brilliant.
It's almost all percussion and Siouxsie singing. It's fantastic stuff.
It's
that
amazing.
Album is really beautiful. The first,
it is brilliant. They're brilliant. What for a while they were incredible. So yeah, that's my number 7. Kiss in the Dream House, Siouxsie and the Banshees, just sheer brilliance. These are all great albums here. Rod, what have you got at number 6?
I'm starting to wonder whether we're going to double up on anything.
We will. There's a clue.
Okay.
We will.
I mentioned it earlier, but it's the most eclectic kind of lists certainly so far, I think. Real mix-up. But number 6, I've got again, Talking Heads. We did a Talking Heads show not so long back.
Yeah.
And they're a favourite band of mine. They're much like Siouxsie and the Banshees. There's certain bands that you can't not include, in my opinion. So I just went for the album that I've played the most, which, Remaining Light. It's not the most punky because their first couple were less or more so. You could argue this is polished, but I think it's 1980. So you're talking about the same time as Killing Joke and a lot of probably harsher sounding post-punk, but I would still regard them as a post-punk band, and it just shows you how far ahead of their time they were, really, I think. To be that kind of clever, sophisticated, innovative, all of the above, really. And we've done the Talking Head show. Once in a Lifetime is a big song off that album, but the other tracks, Cross-Eyed and Painless and Born Under Punches, it starts with that. I mean, just the whole rhythm section of Born Under Punches. I think straight away.
Yes,
the album
Amazing.
This album's going to be absolutely great. Just because you don't have to be a minute into that opening track, and you think if it's going to carry on like this, it's going to be great. Cross-eyed and painless, and then even the quieter songs like "Listening Wind" and that, it's just a masterpiece. And again, I had to have a Talking Heads album in there, and like the Siouxsie reference, "Remaining Light" it'd have to be the album of theirs, because it's the one that I like the best. It's the one I've played the most, and it's the one I still play the most, I suppose. Yeah, absolute top tier, 5-star banger of an album. End of story, really.
It's one I would have included, but I've just felt it was a little to the left of my feeling, my internal gut feeling about post-punk being, if we're gonna make it a genre. So my number 6 is Entertainment, the great debut album by Gang of Four. I think it's one of post-punk's defining albums, the way they combine funk rhythms with angular, scratchy guitar, although there is some definite funk and Hendrix influences in the way Andy Gill plays. Just an absolutely astonishing musician. And also the whole political angle took from punk, but made it a little more smart, a little more analytical. I just love this album. There's not a bad song on it. Not Great Men. How many times do I say to myself at home, he's a tourist? Like if I'm in a new place in New York City where I've lived all my life, that song will start going through my head. It's so perfect. Damaged Goods, they were also taking on feminist issues, which is pretty incredible for that time. Anthrax, Love Will Get You Like a Case of Anthrax. And the way they combine tracks on that is very well done. Ether, Not Great Men, Damaged, like I said, Return the Gift. There is just not a bad song on this record. And I just think that it defines that era in so many ways. I saw somebody saying that there's a touring version of Gang of Four now, and there's no Gang of Four without Andy Gill. I mean, John King, I felt that was a little weird when he left, but without Andy Gill, that's absurd.
I hate that when that sort of thing happens. I just don't understand it.
It's like karaoke guitar. You can't have somebody else do that stuff.
It's like you've got Buzzcocks carrying on without Pete Shelley. You're thinking that's just
right. It's absurd.
Crazy.
It's totally absurd. But I absolutely love this album. Funny story. When they first played New York, I really wanted to go, but I was completely out of cash. I asked my parents for an advance on my allowance so I could buy a ticket, and they said no. And the next day, we're around the breakfast table, and my mom is reading the New York Times, and she goes, "Hey, Jeremy, that band you didn't go see, I don't know why she did this to me. She's a very nice woman. That band you didn't go see got a very good review in the New York Times."
Oh my God!
I was like, "Oh, really? Did they? Thank you so much." 3 of my best friends went to see them. I just could not get up the cash. I did get to see them a few years later on what was supposed to be their last concert ever in New York, when they had Sarah Lee on bass. That was the first swap that happened in their lineup. And they were fantastic. They were excellent. Obviously, they had some hit songs behind them at that point. They were a bit more polished, a bit more new wave. But I love their first 4 albums. They're all pretty good.
Yeah.
So I did get to see them. I did get to see Andy Gill, one of the great slash and burn guitar players of all time. But I missed their first New York show. But I'll never forget this album.
Just below my 10, I'm afraid. Rod, we're gonna have some mutual concurrence here, because in at number 6, I've got Remain in the Light. So there we have it.
Okay.
So I was gonna go with Fear of Music, but I thought, no, it's too rhythmic and slightly. I'm not. It's not quite post-punk in a funny sort of way. Yet Remain in the Light's got a bit more to it, which I don't think either album's any better, may I add. But
That's funny because I was actually thinking that Fear of Music was more post-punk, and that.
Well, there you go. You see. So it's down to whatever that you're feeling. I mean, I was even tempted to go with the second album, if I'm being honest. I love it so much. But I've went with Remain in the Light. It is brilliant. Everything Rod said, I'm not going to go on about it. It's just brilliant. But the grooves are fantastic. But it's out there. There's something unusual about it, something weird about it. It's very dark, so it fits in with that sort of whole sort of stylistic thing as well. It is an absolute masterpiece. Easily could be number 1. As I keep repeating, just throw them up in the air and pick out which one you want to go with. So yeah, Rod, we've agreed there. So what have we got at number 5?
Well, it's a bit of a giveaway because I'm going to stand up a little bit now. I've got the T-shirt at number 5, okay, which is Grotesque by The Fall. I've got a Grotesque Fall T-shirt. I'm a massive Fall
Very
fan.
specific for a T-shirt.
Sorry?
It's very specific to have a one album T-shirt. I like that.
Yeah, it's my favorite album there, so I thought, yeah, I've seen it and thought, yeah, I'll have that. But yeah, I love The Fall anyway, and they've famously got about 8 million albums, haven't they? But they're just, you're talking about, I think you mentioned the Raincoats being quite ramshackle. Well, The Fall are certainly ramshackle, deliberately so, but it works. So they're very ramshackle. They've got absolutely no style, no genre. I mean, they are post-punk because they are post-punk. The guitars, the repetitive. That's something that hasn't come up yet. I've noticed that when I was listening to a lot of post-punk, a lot of the choruses and a lot of the refrains are quite repetitive. So like Gang of Four's album even. I mean, it's a great album entertainment, but a lot of the songs sound quite similar. And a lot of the refrains are very repetitive.
Mm.
And The Fall on their debut album have got a song called Repetition, where he just goes, repetition, pretty much 3 minutes solid. But which is kind of, it's almost like tongue-in-cheek, because it is what it is. But Grotesque, I think, again, out of all our albums, I've listened to it the most. It's got How I Wrote Elastic Man on it, which is kind of a fun, almost pop song.
Great song.
It's got Pay Your Rates, which is classic Fall. It's got Container Drivers, which I absolutely love, about lorry drivers. And it's just, his lyrics are absolutely almost indecipherable, impenetrable, but absolutely ace. So you can read a line of his and go, even though you don't even know what it means, it sounds ace. He's one of the best lyricists ever. I think there's a song by them called Wings, which I remember just reading the lyrics and just, I don't know, just best lyrics ever. That's not on this album, but check out the lyrics for Wings. Anyway, I've digressed. It's got How I Wrote Elastic Man. It's got, and it's got an epic 8-minute, The North Will Rise Again, or NWR, which is, it's quite for them, it's quite a ambitious, sort of serious song, really. Or semi-serious song, and not as frantic and not as ramshackle as the other tracks on it. And it's all English Scheme. I don't know if you know that song. The lyrics in that is, well, they're just sarcastically fantastic. Just sort of just taking the mickey out of the way we live, really. And his commentary on ourselves, if you like, they're very British, I'd say that much. You get a lot of bands like that, whether it's the Kinks or Blur, and it doesn't always resonate in the States, I don't think, Jeremy, because they're quite British.
Yeah.
Before. And they reference a lot of British things rather than international things, not exclusively, but a lot of it is that, about living up north and it being grim and, dampness and just all the sort of mundanity of it. And yeah, they're just a great band. And Marky Smith is one of those kind of, he's a genius, but you don't know why. He's not a great singer. You can't make out what his lyrics probably mean, because they do mean something, but they're quite obtuse, very obtuse. But there's nobody like him, and nobody sounds like them. And I can listen to them, and I love everything about them, The Fall. And yeah, Grotesque is my favorite album of theirs, which is why it's in my top 10. So that's my number 5. Grotesque.
Famously, John Peel's favorite band, weren't they?
Yeah.
And
they did more sessions than anybody else, didn't they?
They had about 26 sessions or something, and they never spoke because Peel was really quite sort of intimidated by them. And but also, The Fall are one of those bands that if you got every member back together, you could fill the Albert Hall.
You could, didn't he, I don't know if
he was the easiest guy to work with.
No, he wasn't. Didn't he famously he was on his way down to London to do a Peel session. He sacked the band on the way. Like the legend.
It's probably true.
Probably is.
Slate's EP, the 10-inch Slate's EP by The Fall. That's my fun fall album. It's really quite good, but I never went all in on them.
I've never went all in on them either. I've tried. It's one of them bands that really try to get it.
I do like the Slate's EP a lot. Live at the Witch Trials is also quite good.
The Witch Trials is good.
But they're one of those bands where I respect and admire them more than love them. Yeah. So
It's
But every
nations
once in a
saving
while,
grace.
like I'll go through and listen to a couple of things. They put out some stuff in the 21st century that was pretty good, actually,
Yeah, yeah, they did definitely.
before he died, unfortunately.
I went to see him just a few years before he died.
Yeah,
Imperial Wax Solvent album. I can't remember what year that was.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there was some good
It's a
stuff.
recent one. Tracks
And
tracks called um, Exploding Chimney, I think, and stuff like that.
I did listen to that one a couple of times, and
It's a good album, actually.
they're good.
Oh, Twilight Stock
Good stuff.
Replacer.
Mhm.
Twilight Stock Replacer. It's about someone working in a supermarket. So it's just
So very,
He
very
was a
down to
good
earth.
man
They're
for all
having the
his
famous
flaws.
song, "Yeah, yeah, Industrial Estate." It's brilliant, brilliant song. It's
yeah.
anyway,
Sorry, I
Jerry.
don't. Yeah, carry on.
Well, I agree. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Jerry, what are you going number five?
Number five, I have my second and last US release, which is Dub Housing by Pere Ubu, their second
Yeah.
album. Just one of my all-time favorite bands. They came from the industrial wasteland, the forgotten city of Cleveland, Ohio. At the time was a factories were all closed. It was a very tough place to make a living, tough place to live. But they came up with this sound that is so unusual, the way the guitar and the bass work together. But also they had this guy, Alan Ravenstein, who played an EML synthesizer. But he did not play it like a keyboard. He played it like a noise and sound generator. So there's all these kind of weird sounds going through. They're incredibly influential in the way he did this. There was no reference to previous instruments. He wasn't doing horn stabs or string sounds. It was all this kind of, you could say bleep bloop, but it was much more artistic than that. And the subjects of their songs were just so out there. I mean, they have a song on here that seems to be a kind of serial killer where he's walking behind somebody. I walk and I walk, and stalking somebody. He's just putting you in this terrifying realm of somebody's psychology. And of course, it's David Thomas, who was this enormous guy and sang in this kind of bleat of a voice. To me, that speaks to the bravery of rock and roll. To be in a band is to confront your limitations and blow them up. And that's what he did. He was a brilliant lyricist. Later on, his lyrics became almost like Raymond Carver short stories. Beautiful stuff. But this album is just wild. And even though it's called Dub Housing, it doesn't really have any reggae influence. There's a lot of stories about why they called it that, but it's just, to me, an absolutely perfect expression of uncompromising artistic rock and roll out of this kind of, this industrial sound, like I said, but there's a lot of rhythmic flexibility to it. It's just absolutely great. And the song, there's one song called Thriller, which starts out very slow and it gradually picks up steam, but it gets subsumed by the noise of what sounds like chewing insects. So it's almost abstract collage-like music. You could call it art rock, but it really is right in there with the post-punk era. I think I could have picked any of their first three albums. The Modern Dance, which has, of course, the one Peter Lochner song that ever made it to vinyl in his lifetime. Life Stinks, which is almost a punk rock song. That's the Modern Dance. Then the third album, New Picnic Time, is even more unusual than Dub Housing. The first few times I listened to it, it made absolutely zero sense, but it's really, really great. The more you listen to it, the more you realize how actually precise and perfectly it's made. And their early singles, Final Solution, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, just wild, wild, beautiful rock and roll. They would sort of seesaw between these two, like the punk impulse, the art impulse, and then something else that was purely their own. I think that of all the post-punk bands, they may be the Feelies were very American too, but there was something very American about Pere Ubu, that heartland sound. And they came out of the same realms of like Rocket from the Tombs, who then became related to the Dead Boys. So there were these different influences going on. I don't know if you know this album at all, but it really is just absolutely fantastic. Bear Ubu Dub Housing. That's my number 5. One of my favorite albums of all time.
Right. Well, that's interesting. Now, again, another one to check out. Couple actually. Right. This is my most controversial pick. So this could have,
Uh-oh.
this could have been my number 1, and it probably was for a little bit, but I moved it because I thought it was so controversial that I was really unsure. And my number 5 is Kate Bush, The Dreamin'. Because I think she's so almost her own genre, but it does. I feel that it fits under the sort of post-punk thing. I know a lot of people go, "Shut up, man! What are you talking about?" But I do. There's definitely certain songs on there that go with it. It's really out there as an album. It's such an unusual. I remember at the time John Lydon loved this album, said it was the sort of maddest and most out there album of the year. And I think he's probably right. I mean, definitely the art rock thing there. I mean, this could have easily been made by Peter Gabriel, could have been made by David Bowie. It's definitely got something along those lines there. I mean, you could argue Gabriel's Melt album would be almost post-punk, but I kept it out there. But I adore it. That would have been number 1 if it had been in.
Don't mess me up anymore.
Yeah. So it was, but it's got that sort of thing to it, because there are not many symbols on the album actually when you listen to it. It's such an unusual album. I mean, Sat in Your Lap could easily be Siouxsie and The Banshees. Could easily. It's got that drum beat there. It sounds like Budgie. It's nuts, but brilliant. Really, really catchy. You've got some odd songs there. There goes a tenor, which a bit like early sort of Genesis or sort of Robbery, Assault and Battery in a funny sort of way. But then you've got these other dark songs like Pull Out the Pin, about Vietnam and pulling out a pin of a sort of grenade. Sort of really dark. Some other really dark songs on it. Leave It Open. It's a dystopian feel about humans as vessels. You got the odd song of The Dreamin' about the destruction of the Aboriginal homelands again. Obviously a dark theme. It's all the love, really haunting, really beautiful song. So a little bit unusual. Houdini's fantastic about contacting him when he's dead. And the irony being, of course, Houdini didn't believe in spiritualism. So there's a real funny sort of twist on it. And then Get Out of My House again, about an alive house. So again, this sort of supernatural feel to the album. The whole album's supernatural, but it's dark. There are some real fast songs, and there's lots of sort of mid-tempo things, but it's really dark and it's sort of really unusual. I do put it in that category, but I appreciate if everyone looks at me and throws things at the screen at this point and says, I don't buy any of that. What are you talking about? Why is public image not in there? And I can get it. I do get it, and that's absolutely fine. But that was my view. And so I've got the lower down than I would have picked, by the way. I'll put The Dreamin' in by Kate Bush in at number 5. So Rod,
I would have to listen to it again to really argue with you. My main issue with her is her voice bothers me. I don't really like the way she uses it. I do like a few of her songs, but she has that David Gilmour relationship from, he produced her first album, so there's that art rock influence for sure.
I bought me mate Dreamin' for his birthday, and I bought him the vinyl, and I bought him, and I think he didn't quite like it the first time he listened to it. Ian, if you're watching, I'm sure you will be. And then he texted us about 2 days later. He goes, "Oh my God, I was upstairs. I put the Dreamin' on. I was just sat there." And he goes, "I was blown away by it. It's so different. It's so out there. It's so..." And I thought, yeah, it's one of those, you just get it. It can just hit you and you go, whoa. Because for years, The Dreamin' was way down on my Kate Bush album list. Wouldn't have been anywhere near in the top 5. And then all of a sudden, just listen and go, oh my God, that's brilliant. It's just one of those albums. You either get it or you don't. I don't think there's no middle ground, which is, again, something I love about Kate Bush. There's very little middle ground. You either love her or you hate her. And that's, my kids don't like her. My wife Karen just says, "Oh, I can't do with her voice." I love her, but there you have it.
I'm not alone.
There you go.
I'm a Kate Bush fan as well, by the way.
Good man, quite right, Rod.
And funny enough, I know it's putting on post-punk, but Peter Gabriel and Don't Give Up. That's one of my favorite songs. It's just them together. That particular song and the vocals on that song. And just a fantastic song. That's just
it's brilliant. It's about the miners' strike as well, so it's very, very personal to the UK. And originally it was going to be Dolly Parton. and he couldn't get Dolly
Yeah.
to be doing it.
Yeah, I read that. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true.
which is fascinating, isn't it? Bizarre but fascinating. Rod, what have you got at number 4?
Yeah, number 4 is a personal memory favorite. It's The Cure, who again, they're a post-punk band. They're one of my favorite bands. They're in my top 5 bands of all time, probably. But they are in '79 they brought the debut album out, and you could easily pick Faith, you could easily pick Pornography, and 17 Seconds. So the first 4 albums you could pick, but I remember buying Three Imaginary Boys, their debut album in '79, and I used to go around a friend's house and we just played it on repeat for about 2 months, because we loved it so much, all of us. And if you listen to it now, it's quite simplistic compared to what they became, because it's quite garagey. It sounds like they made it in their own bedroom kind of sound. It's garage. It's a garage band sort of sound. But songs like, they've stayed with me. Songs like Fire in Cairo, 10:15 on a Saturday night.
Brilliant.
Subway song where you get that scream at the end. There was something about it. I thought, I haven't heard anything like this before. And his voice is unique, still is. There was something about, even at that stage, and even though it's nothing like Disintegration and all the fantastic stuff they did later on, and he became a soundscape, extraordinaire genius songwriter. But there was something about that album. There was something special about that album in my ears, even then when I was 16. And I listened to it loads of times, and I just kept listening to it. And Boys Don't Cry could have been on it, but it wasn't. I think it might have been on the American release or whatever.
Yes, they did a different version, didn't they? For the
I think so. And Jump in Someone Else's Train was on the American. They brought an American release out called Boys Don't Cry. It was about the same time though, because they had a couple of singles, and Killing an Arab I don't think was on the album either. They had 3 singles around that time that weren't on this album, but I was aware of those singles as well, and I just thought, there's something about these guys. And I went to see them live, I think, early on. And the album, I've still got my original copy again. And the album's just, and those memories have stayed with me. And to think, I wouldn't have thought they'd have became what they became necessarily, but there was something special there, and again, he's just so distinctive, isn't he? His voice.
Brilliant. Saw them last year. They were fantastic.
Great live here. And
3 hours as well.
Cabrel's, right, on guitar now.
Yeah, Reeves Cabrel's on guitar. Yeah,
he is. Yeah, and
he's a bassist, amazing.
Lord Tolhurst's been there all the way through, isn't he? The bassist who gives them that, like a Forest, and they're a very bass heavy band anyway. But it helps a bit, like having distinctive rhythm sections, like Budgie and Steve Severin, The Cure have relied on that kind of foundation really for their songs. And that was a starting point, but it's got such a special place in my heart because of those memories. Like I say, it's stayed with me ever since that album. And they don't play a lot of those songs live now because they're quite short and they're quite a bit more punky almost.
They did put in a few last year. I was quite impressed. The set list was amazing. What was also amazing was everybody paid the same price ticket irrespective of where you were in the arena. It was 65.
Yeah, he was very serious about that.
I thought it was
spot on. He pushed for that, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
He
I thought
also
it was
made
spot
Ticketmaster.
Thought what a great bloke. And also what was lovely, they played 5 new songs at the gig, and every one of them was fantastic. So I'm really excited about
a new album for like 10 years.
I'm really excited what the new album's going to be like, because if they're as good as those 5 songs, it'll be superb.
If you ever hear it.
If we ever hear it, yeah. It was very.
I don't know what he's doing.
And although he's got that unique look, he's got no ego. Like you say, he's a really down to earth, really magnanimous, humble kind of guy, and he's very well respected by other artists and other. Was it Chino Moreno from the Deftones? Love The Cure. He invited him on a song for Churches on their new album, I think, to do the chorus with him. And then Trent Reznor famously inducted him into the Hall of Fame. Yeah. I've seen that speech. It's fantastic. Yeah. A 9-minute long speech about how The Cure kind of changed, or them and The Cure, one of the bands that changed his life. Cleveland, Ohio.
Oddly, there's a feud with Paul Weller, isn't there? Weller doesn't like him for some reason. I don't quite get it, because I love Weller. I don't quite get it, but there you have it.
No, there's been a bit of a beef, but yeah, I know who I'd choose anyway. But yeah,
I love them both. But can I just say, Faith would have been my number 11. So it was right on the. Right on. If Kate Bush wasn't in, Faith was in. So
Faith. Yeah.
I'm admittedly not a Cure fan, but I do like the American version of the debut album quite a bit. that's the one I would listen to more than any of the other ones. So good call.
Jeremy, then what have you got at number 4?
Number 4, and things were sliding around between the top 4 a lot, but I'm once again joining in with Killing Joke's first album. I think it's often been my favorite album of 1980 and definitely one of the top 10 albums of the decade. But in this context, I put it in at number 4, partly because of what else I have to go with. We already talked about it. It's one of the greatest debut albums of all time, a totally distinct sound. He also used synthesizers in a very unmusical way, Jazz did, compared to what most people were doing with synths back then. A little like Pere Ubu in that sense. But one thing I'll mention about it is I did a deep dive on it for its 40th anniversary, I guess it was, or 45th anniversary, I can't remember. And they talked about the fact that, and a lot of people forget that around 1979, 1980, people were really worried about nuclear disaster, warfare. But we had the 3 Mile Island meltdown.
Yeah.
We had this Indian Point, which is north of me here in New York State. There was talk about that there had been a meltdown that they covered up, and this and that. People were really nervous about that.
Yeah, definitely.
And there was the No Nukes concert.
Yes, Springsteen, very famous.
Really young but if you listen to the No Nukes album, it's a bunch of rich hippies moaning about nuclear power. Whereas you've got Killing Joke are like, okay, if we're going to live in a nuclear wasteland, we need a soundtrack, and here it is. Dance on the rubble, march on the rubble, shout from the rooftops of your, half-destroyed skyscraper as the sun turns green. That's what it was. One of the things I love about it is that it creates a whole world, and one in which you can say, this is maybe a more apropos response to this. If we're not going to stop nuclear disaster, let's celebrate it. And that's one of the things I love about it.
Let's have a war dance.
And speaking of, difference between UK and US releases, my version of the album does have Change on it, which was a single in the UK.
Yeah.
But I really like the way it fits on side 2 between Complications and SO36. Just puts that, real dance song in there, famously borrowing from War's Me and Baby Brother for that riff. A little bit also like Bowie's Stay, so it's almost like a classic funk riff that they turn into this industrial monolith. And
I didn't know that was added. It's lucky you, really, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, I also have the 12-inch because I saw it somewhere for cheap. But and Gordy's guitar on the song Change, it just kind of makes you like, there's the rhythm, but then his guitar is rhythm. He doesn't really play a solo, but he does this like lightning bolt kind of thing, where it just kind of bursts out of the mix with this golden color. I mean, what a genius guitar player. And the fact, you see behind me the first single, Nervous System and Turn to Red, which are both great songs, but much more stripped down and kind of, they don't have that overwhelming sonic experience of what became. So there's obviously a big transition between making that first single and making the first album. If you read interviews with them, they say, oh, well, we just smoked a ton of weed and came up with this album, which you wouldn't, it doesn't sound like a weed album to me, but there you have it. That's from their words and mine. But it's just one of the greatest albums of all time, a great post-punk album. That is my number 4.
Yeah, and we discussed it. Geordie, Geordie, the pronunciation, but
Geordie,
great,
I know,
great guitarist. And I'm just outside my thing now, list now, because I've started listening to quite a bit of them recently, really, really, really grown into them. So I love that. My number 4 is XTC Black Sea. Now, I was tempted to go with English Settlement, but I thought this was more post-punk as an album than English Settlement, which is a sort of different other album. This is a great album again. It's just, it's fabulous, rhythmically brilliant, humorous lyrics, production. I love it by Steve Lillywhite. He's one of my favorite producers. It's just superb. I love the way it starts with that crackling at the beginning, and then it comes in with Respectable Street, which is almost like a Kinks song. And as you were saying about before, XTC are very English. They're very English, and I don't think they really cross the pond, do they? Apart from the odd big single, they're just one of those great bands. They should have been massive. It's just brilliant. It's a song about Curtain Twitchers. It's got that Hilda Ogden British sort of feel to it. Generals and Majors, brilliant pop song, again with beautiful angular guitars. Living in Another Cuba, brilliant. You know, and again, post-war, like that war apocalyptic sort of feel to it as well, isn't it? You know, no, it's just great. So every song on it's top draw, No Language at All, Lungs, Tower of London, great pop song, Burning Optimism Flame, Sergeant Rock's great, Traveling Islands, great. And then if you get the bonus version, there's also some other great songs on there. I mean, you know, you've got things like Somnambulist is fantastic. Don't Lose Your Temper is a really good punky type song, actually.
I have those on singles.
It's just great. Can I just add, though, the musicianship of the band is brilliant. Terry Chambers, great drummer. He's drumming on the songs like Travels and Islands, fantastic. Papers and Iron, his drumming's great. The guitar's fantastic. The bass player's great. He's a great singer as well. They're one of my favorite ever bands. People need to be listening to them far more. And this isn't even my favorite XTC album. Yeah, it's brilliant. It's absolutely magnificent. They're just one of the great bands. Brilliant, isn't it? I'm going to go and see him playing XTC songs in there in July, the day after my daughter's birthday. So on July the 5th, we're going to go down and I'm going to go down and watch him with me mate Ian. So 2 sets of XTC songs. Can't wait to see it. So yeah, that's my number 4, Black Sea XTC. Just a magnificent album. So Rod, what have you got at number 4? 3, sorry.
Top 3, yeah.
Getting there.
Yeah, number 3. Again, I'm not sure Jeremy wasn't involved, but we did a Joy Division show, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
There's another show that's available. I've got Closer at 3. Or is it Closer?
Closer, I think. I don't know. It's hard to tell now, isn't it? I've never thought of it. Yeah.
Just because it's like
try to argue that it's Closer, but it really is.
I think it is Closer. I think people, like I say, people have said since, you think, oh, maybe it isn't, but no, I think it is Closer. And it's just post-punk brilliance, really. You've got Isolation, which is a classic up-tempo kind of post-punk riff, but then even the first track, Atrocity Exhibition, it's the drums, that it's kind of off, it's sort of out of kilter, isn't it? It's sort of out of time slightly. It's a sort of off, an out of time signature, but it works, and it's kind of frantic and a bit just very unsettling. And the lyrics, it's just a great song, Atrocity Exhibition, a great opener. And then it's just got some classic songs on it, you know, Decades and 24 Hours. I know you're a fan of 24 Hours particularly. I love The Eternal because it evokes, I think I said on the Joy Division show, it evokes being at a funeral more than any other song that I've heard. You know, I've been at a lot of funerals, unfortunately, in my life, and just if you just listen to the lyrics and the whole mood of it, and it's just so succinct. It just paints a perfect picture and mood of being, you know, at a funeral and flowers and watching clouds and leaves, and it's just fantastic. It's just it's dark but beautiful and majestic, isn't it? Simultaneously, it's just all of those things, and
absolutely,
it's just a great album. I think the only track on it I'm not keen on. I've got hardly any albums actually that don't skip one track. I was talking to my brother about this the other day, and there's loads of albums I love, but there's not many albums that don't skip a track. I don't really like Colony. I just thought I'd mention that overly. Don't know why, but it's just a track on the album that, it's never really, just is, I think it's a bit disappointing compared to the rest of the album. But the album is just, it could have been 2 really, but it just got bumped down by my number 2, where I don't skip anything.
No spoilers.
Sorry?
No spoilers.
It's a great choice. It's a great choice. I mean, Unknown Pleasures. I thought you were going to pick it, so I didn't bother picking it. So it's not made my top 10, and it would have done. And I thought Rod was going to pick it, but there you have it. So great choice, Jeremy. What have you got in at number 3?
Number 3, I have the other one-off album in my number 10. And I recently wrote that John Cale is Wales' greatest gift to music. This is the second greatest gift to music of the country of Wales.
Young Marble Giants.
It's Young Marble Giants, Colossal Youth. It's an album that's so good they never had to make another album. It really is. You know, they put out a couple of singles afterward. The Great Final Day single is fantastic. Test Guard EP, which did not have Allison Staton on it. But it really is that combination of heavy bass, minimal guitar, this rinky-dink organ, and a homemade drum machine. They had a friend build them this drum machine to provide the rhythms, and it's very much like dum 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 dum. But then you have Allison Staton, one of the most unique vocalists in history. And I think there was Life Without Buildings, which came a little bit later, took off on some of her ideas, I think. But now you have bands like Dry Cleaning is one where I really feel like they would not exist without Allison Staton. She sort of speaks, sings in this almost naive sounding way. And one of the most surprising things about it is that the lyrics sound so personal. They were all written by Stuart. Stuart Moxham wrote all the lyrics and had her sing them. So it's very unusual. And I think there was a kind of not perfect relationship between her and Stuart's brother Philip, who played the bass. There's just the sound on it is utterly distinctive. It sounds like nothing else. Searching for Mr. Right is the opening number. It just immediately captivates you. And then you have other classic songs, The Man Amplifier, Wurlitzer Jukebox, Salad Days, Credit in the Straight World, which was famously covered by Hole about a decade later, Brand New Life. It's just so unusual sounding. And like I said, the influence has been long running, but I would say it's a very boutique choice for people. Another one of Kurt Cobain's favorite albums. He loved, Marble Giants. I totally adore this album. One of my big regrets, another one, I didn't even realize they were playing in New York City at the time. I don't know where my head was, but they played at Hurrah, the same club where I saw the Feelies around the same time. And I never got to see them live, very upset about that. But I really think that they almost are best as a studio band. I've watched some of their live videos and they are quite good. The other thing that's interesting about the sound when you think about post-punk and the punk revolution, how it revolutionized recording, is that even though this album is very much not a punk album, it was recorded almost all first take stuff. There's a couple of overdubs. They knew what their sound was. They knew what they wanted. They actually recorded the album twice. The first time it didn't quite come out the way they wanted. So rather than layering stuff on top of that or trying to polish it up in post-production, they said, you know what? We need to find a different studio. We know the sound we want, very specific, and we're going to find the right situation. We're going to put the microphones in the right place. We're going to do everything. So it's almost like a live album in a sense, in that they found their sound and they recorded it. But man, do I love this record. I think Allison Staton was a genius. She became a therapist, I think, or massage therapist. She does something completely outside of music. Occasionally, the Moxham brothers will pop up in this or that project. They're often fairly interesting, but they don't grab you. And I think part of it is the tension between the three of them. There was this tension and just the brilliance of the words that he gave her to sing and the way she sang them in this, like I said, faux naive, almost innocent way. Not, some would say, is she in tune? Is she not in tune? It doesn't really matter. It's just absolutely perfect. There's nothing I would change about Colossal Youth by Young Marble Giants. It's my number 3.
Interesting. Well, my favourite Welsh band are The Alarm, but that's another story. If it went 84 Declaration, might have made it. Well, my number 3 is a bit more of a crossover again. We've gone with Real Life by Magazine. It's just brilliant, man. It's a top-notch album. Everything about it is fantastic. Yeah, Rod said everything I really want to say about it. Just a couple of it's one of the first post-punk albums, arguably. It mixes punk, prog, indie, almost gothic feel as well about it as well, which Joy Division I think took quite a bit from Magazine, in my opinion. There's a definite crossover there at some point. The musicianship's brilliant. I mean, Barry Adamson is a terrific bass player. And of course, he would go on to be in Visage as well, which people forget about, as well as the Bad Seeds. So he had a massively varied career, as well as being.
If you know his album Moss Side Story, do you know that album?
I do.
And that's a fantastic record.
And of course, he's a great soundtrack guy as well. So he's a massive, great musician, isn't he? Dave Formula on keys was excellent and it had that prog feel. And of course, you got John McGeoch on guitar, who's just brilliant. We've mentioned already. I'm not going to go over the songs. And the drummer, of course, who bizarrely left and joined Swing Out Sister in the mid '80s, which is quite a
That's a big change. I didn't realize that.
which is quite a breakout.
He got paid well.
Sorry, Al, I should
Very
leave
good.
after that gag. But they're just they were a great band, Magazine, or top band. This is a really incredible album. I cannot speak highly enough about it. Could easily be number one. If there's nothing on it that's average, everything is exceptional. Devoto's voice is so unusual yet perfect, as Rod rightly said, that it just fits brilliantly with the music. And I love the rhythmic changes in the band with the music as well, in terms of they could start off like Motorcade. I love the way it speeds up and it's just fabulous. It's got a real groove and there's a little bit of craft work in there as well. It's they're just a top notch band, and it annoys me when you see greatest band from Manchester and you have all these great bands like the Smiths and that mentioned. Buzzcocks rarely get mentioned, which I find outrageous, and then Magazine never get mentioned. And I just think, hey, come on, learn your history, folks. Learn your history.
Nor do the Whole.
Or the Bee Gees, but that's another issue.
They were Australian originally, though.
Well, no, they were from Manchester originally. Well, Isle of Man,
Well,
actually.
Manchester and then Australia, and then they came back.
Yeah.
I
So
think so, yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, enough of the brothers, Gib. So that's my number 3 is Magazine. Rod, what have you got at number 2?
Well, number 2 is a no skip album. I think I mentioned it earlier. It's I love Echo and the Bunnymen. They're one of my favorite bands, and probably a top 10 band of mine, I would say. And their second album, I mean, Ocean Rain, people reference as their best album. It's got Killing Moon on it, and some pretty big songs that are globally known because of Donnie Darko and stuff. But Heaven Up Here as an album is their best album in my opinion. It's just it's got a really strong opener in Show of Strength. It's a really powerful sort of driving song, and then it ends with All I Want, which is very strong. It's got a very powerful ending for beginning and ending, and in the middle it just goes up and down in tempo. It's got really slow songs like A Promise, which is quite a big single actually of theirs. All My Colors is a great slow song of theirs. And then there's a song called Over the Wall, where it's quite sort of a mellow verse, but then when the chorus comes in, it just comes in really suddenly. It's a perfectly balanced album. It's one of the few albums, like I say, that I can play anytime, and there's not a weak track on it. It's just, and I genuinely think that although he's a bit of a Noel Gallagher-esque, like to use a British term, Jeremy, he's a bit of a gobshite, Ian McCulloch, but he is a genius songwriter. He is a genius songwriter, I think. He's written some absolute, like Julian Cope. There's a bit of rivalry between the two, a bit of banter about who's the best songwriter. They're both great songwriters, don't get me wrong, but you can hear the Doors' influence in the Bunnymen a lot. They covered People Are Strange, I think, and some of their sort of soaring choruses are quite Doorsy, I think, and the rhythm section's a bit Doorsy. But they've got their own sound, and they're up there with anyone post-punk, new wave. They're on a par with anyone, in my opinion. So, and Heaven Up Here is my favourite album of theirs, which is why it's number 2.
What year was that?
81.
81. Okay.
81, yeah.
I'm in and out on Echo and the Bunnymen, but they do have a lot of great songs. My number 2 has already been mentioned. It is Closer, second down from Joy Division. I was seesawing between Atrocity but not between Unknown Pleasures and Closer. They're both superb albums, I think. But this was the one I heard first, just because in America we were just a little bit behind, and so found and bought it because there'd been so much excitement about this band. And man, it just hit me right from the beginning. Like you say, that intro to Atrocity Exhibition is just unbelievable, with the grinding, gnashing guitars and synthesizers. Who even knows what's going on there? Martin Hannett again, just a brilliant producer. I mean, he made them work so hard on this record, recording cymbal tracks, the hi-hat, only the hi-hat. Yeah. I mean, he put the drummer through his paces. It's just absolutely insane. With Stephen Morris, right? Just the work that they went through to make this record. But to me, it's an absolutely gleaming cube of a record. There is no flaw in it. I love Colony. I love all the songs. And that last, I mean, decades. It's one of the saddest songs of all time. Here are the young men, their arms on their shoulder. It's just so beautiful, though. Beautifully sad. I mean, I can't say enough about it. It's just one of the all-time great albums. It's my number 2. Like I said, I feel very lucky to have. I got the version with the flexi disc in it. Because I bought it right when it came out. So Komakino is a great song. Incubation. I mean, I love all their songs. There is not a bad Joy Division song, in my opinion. Oddly enough, I don't like New Order. Barely at all. I like 3 of them.
Yeah, I'm probably in the same boat.
Do not
They're very
understand.
different. I'm not a big. I'm not a massive New Order fan either.
They're just not the same band. They don't have the same goals, the same vision. Ian Curtis was so important to all of that, and I really mourn his passing. It's a true tragedy.
Very much.
Was cut off. If you want to talk about Doors influence, there's a lot of that here too.
Yeah,
and that resonated with me as a big fan of the Doors, a big fan of 60s music. So, it's just all-timer. We were going to get tickets to see them, and then we got the news.
Oh, of course, yes. That's why
They
he's doing the American tour.
did have a New York tour planned, and we were like just about like, oh, can you go down to Bleecker Bob's to buy the tickets? That kind of thing. Like, and then it's like, oh, wait a minute.
If you get the chance, listen to Peter Hook's audio book on Joy Division. It's fantastic.
I read it.
It's I spoke to him. He's actually a very funny man. He's one on New Order, even though I'm not a New Order fan. He's one on New Order is brilliant. It's really funny, dark, very dark as well. Worth a read. Big thick book, the second one, but very funny.
Even my feelings about New Order do not change my feelings that he's one of the greatest bass players of all time.
Great bass player. Yeah.
When I was picking up the bass, it was somebody who will be mentioned shortly, Ian Curtis, and then of course Aston Family Man Barrett and Bob Marley and the Wailers.
Well, he was massively influenced by J.J. Burnell, was who he talks about in terms of his sound.
Yeah.
So he wanted the look of Paul Simonon, with it having
they wore their bass really, really low.
Yeah, really low. How low can you go?
Mine was more like belt level. They wear their like below the belt. I'm like, how can you play that way? Youth is like that too from Killing Joke.
Yes.
He looks like he's just doing nothing, and these amazing bass lines are happening.
Yeah, the Cure.
Whatever.
The Cure's bass is really slung low as well. Yeah, very low. And I think you mentioned in the previous show, Jeremy, that nobody's as cool as Paul Simonon.
No,
nobody. Yeah, he is definitely one of the.
Paul Simonon is like the Fonz of punk rock, isn't he?
Robert Mitchum, James Dean level of cool.
All rolled into one, I think.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And a great player. Right. Well, my number 2 is totally different. The singer left Thin Lizzy, and then he joined Ultravox. And my number 2 is Vienna. I think it's an incredible album. I do. I think it was actually my number 1 until earlier on today, and I switched it last minute because this is possibly the album I played the most. It's just a brilliant album. John Fox, who had previously been the singer of Ultravox, who's great as well. Check out those albums. Mitch is much maligned, and he shouldn't be, in my opinion. This is a really great album. It's clearly linked to Kraftwerk and all those great sort of European sounds. They've definitely got all of that going on, the art rock sound, but you've got that sort of darker edge, that post-punky thing going on as well. It's a phenomenal album. It really is. Just 9 tracks long as well. You mix the sounds of the keyboards, the guitars are really quite prominent at times. Then you've got a viola, which just sounds amazing. The songwriting is just sublime, to be honest. I love the fact that as an album, they've got a new singer and they start the album with an instrumental. I just think that's top draw. I think, well done, you know, you took a real chance. And Astrodyne is just a fantastic song. And I love the keys on it. It's got a real unusual sound. You've then got New Europeans, which again fits in with that sort of whole ethos, that new romantic thing that was coming out. But again, it does fit in with that post-punk sort of feel. It's, you know, Passing Strangers is just great sort of poppy, punky, whatever sort of song. Sleepwalk definitely fits in with that. I love the intro with the drums and the keys are really driving. It's brilliant. Mr. X could easily be Kraftwerk. There's a German version they do called Hair X, which is brilliant. Vienna, of course, is a magnificent song. It's a real big sort of crescendo at the end. I love the build-up. I love the viola. It really motors, and then you got this big, massively melodramatic ending, over the top, if in some respects. And then you got this really fast, climactic song with All Stood Still at the end, which they used to finish gigs off with, and they'd all play the drums at the end together live. I was lucky enough to see them twice when they reformed, and they were just superb live. So yeah, it's just, again, people might be kicking off at the screen at this point, but I definitely put this under the post-punk bracket, and so I've got Vienna by Ultravox in at number 2. So Rod, what have you got at number 1?
Well, I don't know whether it's cheating or not.
As far as Ultravox goes, you've got the krautrock influence there with Connie Plank,
Yeah,
who he also worked with Killing Joke later on, and obviously lots of bands like, I think he might have worked with Can. I know he worked with Cluster, so that's a great choice.
different. Rod, what have you got number 1 then?
Definitely different. I don't know whether I've cheated, because I know that we mentioned earlier about having one album per band, which is what you decided.
That's a personal choice.
That's all right. You go with your choice.
Well, I've got Unknown Pleasures at number 1.
Right. Well, there you go then. Spot on.
And I know that's got Joy Division. I've got 2 in the top 3, but that's because
they're both incredible.
To me, they are both incredible. They are the standout post-punk band for me. There's lots of great artists, and it was a great time, and there was
a magnificent album.
Yeah. Unknown Pleasures, and unlike Jeremy, I heard that first. Like, he heard Closer first. I heard Unknown Pleasures first, and I seen Ian Curtis on the TV doing his strange dance. I'm thinking, what the hell? What's going on here? And then bought the album, and She's Lost Control, and Shadow Play, and Day of the Lords, and just it's otherworldly, and still is, really. And I don't know, it's one of my favorite albums of all. I don't know if it's my favorite album of all time, but it's up there without a doubt. I could listen to it, you know, just whenever, really. Just people might say, oh, it's dark, you need to be in the right sort of mood, but not really. You know, it's just a fantastic album, and nothing's really sounded like it before or since. You know, they've obviously had influences, like you say, by the Doors, and a lot of music happened before Joy Division, but I don't know, nothing really did sound like that, did it? And they've influenced other bands like Interpol and Editors and all these sorts of other bands who you can see that they've loved them and took, you know,
influences are massive, aren't they?
Oh, they're yeah, and Joy Division and they're massively influential for a relatively late band, I suppose you'd call it. You know, in terms of musical history, if you like. You know, you got a lot of 60s and 70s bands. You know, because they're almost sort of 79, 80, they are very influential, aren't they? I know there's been other bands.
Bedrock, I call it bedrock music. You cannot ignore it. You must accept that it's just among the greatest music of all time.
It is. It's one of those. It is a seminal moment in time album, like you say, which is like a foundation where other things come from. You know, it's in that envelope, isn't it? Of, you know, the Doors debut, and you know, there's albums that you could put in that bracket, and that's in that bracket.
And we can't ignore, once again, Martin Hannett's vision, production sound of the album, because if you listen to Warsaw, which was their previous band, it's some good punky stuff. There's some really good Warsaw songs that I like quite a bit, but Martin Hannett heard something else, and they didn't like it at first. They were
they didn't like it. No,
quite annoyed. That it sounds so different from their live sound.
I've watched a couple of documentaries, and you're right. They weren't sure about it,
but I think they had to admit that he was right.
Oh, absolutely. And he just created this unique atmosphere. and sound.
So
I mean,
great.
one of their most famous songs is called Atmosphere, but everything they do is about atmosphere,
Yep.
and they do it sort of better than pretty much anybody, really. You know, unbelievable.
Yeah, how odd that one of the great post-punk, this dark, unusual European sounding band was also one of the great singles bands when you think about it. Atmosphere, Transmission,
Love Will
She's
Tear
Lost
Us Apart.
Control, Love Will Tear Us Apart. Those are just some of the greatest singles of all time.
And they weren't on any album. They weren't on any of their album.
Yeah, are they pop songs? No, but they have a certain appeal. The sound of Transmission and the lyrics. Dance, dance, dance. The music on the radio and Atmosphere is just this like gorgeous sculpture and sound. I could go on about Joy Division forever.
Yeah.
It's just
whether it's Atmosphere, which is really incredibly slow, and Transmission, they're both different ends of the spectrum, but they both put you in a trance, both of them, don't they?
And Love Will Tear Us Apart. I mean, the construction of Love Will Tear Us Apart.
Yeah.
The acoustic, the 12-string intro,
It's,
and then
yeah.
those drums come in. That album set the tone as much as anything else in 1980, set the tone, or their albums, and especially Love Will Tear Us Apart, the song, I think set the tone almost for the whole decade. People started drumming differently because of Stephen Morris's drumming on that song.
Yeah, definitely a different sound, wasn't it?
A bit like what you said, Jeremy, in a previous, our Beatles show. I think you said Abbey Road acted as a bit of a template.
It set the tone for the 70s.
Template for the rock that came after that, or the decade after that, maybe.
Yep.
And then Joy Division was similar, completely different albums, but a similar thing. Yeah, definitely. I mean, mesmeric is a word I'd use. Yeah, absolutely mesmeric.
Great choice. Top choice. It is a worthy number one. Absolutely. Absolutely. Jeremy, what have you got at number one?
My number one, and I'm shocked that this hasn't been mentioned at all by anyone, although Sid still has one more to go, but maybe I'm really the only one who is an absolute fanatic for Public Image Limited's second album, originally released as Metal Box. It became known as Second Edition when they put it out on conventional double album. This album, to me, it's so original, it's so unique. And it really, to me, it's way better than Nevermind the Bollocks. If you're going to consider like what John Lydon has contributed to music, I like Nevermind the Bollocks a lot. It's a beautiful album. The Sex Pistols really did a fantastic job with that. But when you listen to what he's doing here, just finding his voice in this most unusual way, and all the different kinds of voices he uses. And then you've got Keith Levine, one of the all-time great original guitarists. There is no U2. There is no Edge without Keith Levine. He heard that sound and he completely just took it, hook, line, and sinker for Boy. I remember we bought Boy and we were like, Keith Levine should sue this man. This is terrible.
Boy almost made my list, by the way. Boy's very close to my list.
Utter rip-off, rubbish album. I hate that. But, and then I was going to talk about my favorite bass players. This is almost like a bass player's album. Jaw Wobbles, the sound of it is just so intense. And one of the reasons they put it out this way is it's on 3 12-inches. So the grooves are ultra wide. And it really just ripples through your room just incredibly well. I just love the combination of those elements. And it's also very spacious. They took a lot from dub reggae, created a lot of space around things. But there's also a lot of variety, in terms of rhythm. And then you've got Radio 4, which is this kind of elegiac instrumental. They really did incredible work. The first album is very good, and I almost thought about that, but it does have Fodder Stomp on it, which is a 11-minute song or something that they really just jammed on to fill up the album. They didn't have quite enough songs to fill up the album. So to me, and I've had arguments with people, oh no, it is a great song. I'm like, not really. It's kind of a joke, and they did it that way. So that album has a big ding on it because of that. All the Annalisa and Public Image are great songs. Religion, I love. But this album to me has nothing to complain about on it. No skips, just absolutely gorgeous, unique, original album. A little bit like the Feelies, their next album was completely different. It had almost no bass on it. It was almost all drums and guitar and synthesizers, and John Lydon wailing away like an Arabic, an imam or something. So, but Flowers of Romance is a great album too. It's fantastic. It's very unique. But this is the one that I just can never get enough of. But as soon as that bass starts from Albatross, it just sets the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. And Pop Tones is just one of a case of John Lydon showing that one of his superpowers to me is his empathy. People think of him as this nasty, this and that character. But when you listen to Pop Tones, it's sung from the point of view of a girl who has been abducted. Who is willing to put themselves in the shoes of somebody near the end of their life at the hands of another person? It's, to me, it's just an extraordinary reaching out across human beings. Absolutely fantastic record. The funny story about, I was in J&R Music World and I saw this and it was $25. I was like, ooh, that's kind of steep. Wasn't so sure. I really liked the album. Went away for the summer. All summer long, I'm like, you idiot. Why didn't you buy it? It's only $25. I was working as a mother's helper, they called it, like a babysitter, built-in babysitter living up in the Adirondacks. As soon as I got back, I had a big wad of cash, for being paid. And I ran down to J&R Music World. I was like, oh my God, I hope it's still there. But they only made, I think they made 50,000 of these worldwide, shipped 10,000 of them to the US. So it's not a very limited edition, but it's still limited. And there it was sitting right there. Nobody had bought it, or maybe they'd gotten another one in. I'm not really sure, but I was so happy. I rode the subway like this, can't wait to get home and play it. I just could not see getting the double album version of it. It just didn't have the same flavor to me. Well, that's how I first heard it. I borrowed it from a friend. And another famous story about it was my friend called me up and said, hey, we're going to go see Johnny Rotten's new band. I was like, I don't need any more of that 3-chord stuff. I'm onto something else. And then he lent me second edition like 2 days later. I was like, once again, what an idiot. How could I? Oh man. So I missed their first gig in New York, but I saw them 2 other times, including the famous Riot show, which you may have heard about at the Ritz, where they were performing behind a screen, which I was totally fine with. But 90% of the audience was not. Started throwing bottles, tore down the screen, like $10,000 worth of damage in a few seconds. The band scattered. We all ended up on the sidewalk going, what the heck? Why didn't people just let them do what they wanted to do? It's public image, for God's sake. But then I got to see them like a month or 2 later. They played Roseland Ballroom. It's the original lineup. Although maybe not the drummer. They've had so many different drummers over the years.
Yeah, I'm not sure the drummer
Mel
counts, to
Wobble,
be honest.
Keith Levine, and John Lydon. And they just played a straight killer set, like the first 2 albums, and maybe 1 song from Flowers of Romance. And it was just absolutely incredible. One of the greatest bands of all time. Their last album was also pretty good. They still have, once in a while, they'll pop up and put something together that's pretty good. I did like End of World quite a bit, but I didn't really like it when they became like a 90s alternative band with, they had that album, I think it was called Album. Was that the one? Or Angers and Energy, like that stuff, didn't really work for me.
Yeah.
But Metal Box, my number 1 post-punk album of all time. I think it defines the genre. And
Well, I was listening to the Jaw Wobble version today, the dub album. If you get a chance to listen to the Jaw Wobble one, it's fantastic.
I
Really
haven't
is
heard that
brilliant.
yet.
It's honestly, it's brilliant. So first song is Albatross,
Yeah.
shorter. It's about 4 minutes rather than 9 or 10 minutes. It's brilliant. It's an absolutely fantastic interpretation of the album, but it's all dub. Brilliant, absolutely top notch. I love the album. I just think Lydon's an arse, I think is the polite way I'm going to say it. So I've removed him for that purpose alone. I
Like I
don't
said the other day about
agree
Kanye
with his
West,
politics.
whatever he's done since then cannot take away
Yeah.
my relationship with this record.
Yeah, it's odd, isn't it? It's yeah, it is a great album. It is. I love the heaviness of it. And I love the fact that they just sort of jammed half of it on the spot as well. I love stuff like that. But
Yeah.
it's a great album. Anyway, I've cheated for my number 1, and I've gone in with Iggy Pop, The Idiot, and because I think it is probably the first proper post-punk album, and it's arguably the most influential. I mean, ironically, of course, it's the album that Ian Curtis played when he was dead, wasn't it? That was actually
Mhm.
going around on the grooves on the player. It's just a top-notch album. Recorded in '76 at the Chateau de Ville, with Bowie recorded Low. Bowie wrote most of the music, funnily enough, and Iggy wrote the lyrics. So I'm sure he must have wrote some of the music, but it blends all of that Kraftwerk, Can sort of stuff. It's got an unusual guitar sound. You've got the Damn rhythm section of Dennis Davis, Carlos Alomar, George Murray, but you've also got Phil Palmer on guitar, where it's an unusual weird guitar sound, but it just works really well. It's just amazing. It's clearly influenced the likes of Depeche Mode, Nine Inch Nails, all of those great bands that would come along, Siouxsie a little bit later on. You've got the pulsating rhythms stuff on sort of System of Midnight, which is fantastic. Nightclubbing is brilliant.
Yeah.
I once saw Grace Jones coming on to nightclubbing. It's one of the best gigs I've ever been to. I think I was the only straight man in the whole audience, may I add.
I saw her too, and I think
It was an amazing show. She came up on this huge thing that was, I don't know how they were wheeling it in. It was with 60 foot up in the air. What a show that was. What a spectacle. If you get a chance to go see Grace Jones, go and see her. Amazing. Fun time, brilliant. Love the guitar sound on it. Bowie's backing vocals, great. China Girl, Iggy's version is miles better, may I add. Dum Dum Boys is brilliant. Mass Production is mental. It's just this weird guitar sound. It's odd. And Bowie deliberately, yeah, it is. And Bowie deliberately kept this from being released before Low, because he wanted to release Low for a different sort of style and different sound before he did this. Probably because Iggy would have got all the acclaim maybe early on. But this was definitely recorded first, mainly in France, but also in Germany and mixed at Hansa. By Visconti, who said he had to do a recovery job on it. But it's just brilliant. It is. It's groundbreaking. I listen to it loads. It's arguably my top 10 favorite albums ever. If I had to pick one, it's right up there. There's just something about it. It's just sensational. It is dark. It has all that sort of post-punk feel to it.
Yeah.
Again, people might argue and say, "Oh, it's not a post-punk album."
You're not wrong. It's tough to argue with.
It's brilliant, and it's almost like the godfather of that genre in many respects. Yeah. It is just sublime. So yeah.
How do you make Low, Idiot, Lust for Life, and Heroes all in the space of like 18 months or something?
It's just insane. And then Station was just before it, which is just crackers.
Totally mind-boggling.
I mean, if I was able to put Bowie in, I would have probably put Lodger in as a sort of post-punk.
I was thinking about that too.
But I would have that might have got it number one actually, ironically. But I thought no, I better not put him in.
Great album,
but it is magnificent. But there we go, folks. What a fascinating conversation. Some really different choices. Looks like Joy Division have won there, and rightly so. Let's be honest. So send us your lists. Subscribe to the channel. Check out other shows out like we've been mentioned earlier on. We've got plenty to look at, and let me know what you think of the show. All right, be polite. All right, take care. Till the next time, from Jeremy, Rod, and myself. Bye-bye.